The desert wind scraped across metal hulls like sandpaper on steel. Engines coughed in the cold of dawn, sending tremors through the ground. The faint smell of oil clung to the air, mixing with powder from spent shells. In that emptiness, one paradox loomed. Erwin Rommel believed the United States could not fight, yet soon he would face an army built from factories that could forge 1,000 tanks before breakfast. How does a commander's certainty dissolve when confronted by mass and momentum? In 1941, the United States Army ranked 17th in global strength. Barely 174,000 men stood under arms before mobilization. U.S. War Department, 1941. Portugal's army looked larger on paper. The U.S. tank force counted fewer than 400 machines, many armed only with 37mm guns. For comparison, Germany fielded more than 3,500 armored vehicles during its 1940 campaigns in France and the Low Countries. Bundesarchiv, 1940. Rommel's staff looked at these figures and laughed. German war culture placed faith in skill, speed, and technical edge. The Panzer III, armed with a 50mm gun, had proven itself in the Balkans. The Panzer IV, with its short-barreled 75mm, supported infantry with devastating effect. Crews drilled relentlessly, officers studied doctrine, and entire divisions moved with mechanical rhythm. Against this, America's reputation seemed clumsy. "They are industrialists, not soldiers," noted one German officer in a diary later captured in Tunisia, U.S. National Archives, 1943. The Axis motif begins here. Underestimation of the opponent. Rommel had spent his career defying odds, storming through France with rapid maneuvers, striking in Africa with columns that lived off speed. To him, the idea of America producing real fighting formations sounded absurd, yet the numbers shifted quickly. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, U.S. mobilization accelerated with unprecedented speed. Within a year, over 4 million men were under arms. War Production Board, 1942. Factories in Detroit retooled to produce tanks, trucks, and aircraft. Assembly lines that once built sedans now stamped armor plates. In early 1942, fewer than 1,000 Shermans existed. By the end of 1943, nearly 20,000 had rolled off lines. The Sherman M4 entered production in February 1942. It weighed 30 tons, mounted a 75mm M3 gun, carried 5 crew, and could reach 25 miles per hour on rough ground. Its maximum range was 120 miles on 1 tank of fuel. Armor thickness varied from 50 to 75mm, enough to resist most early German anti-tank weapons. For American crews who had trained on light Stuarts, the Sherman felt like a revolution. Rommel first heard reports of Shermans arriving with Operation Torch in November 1942. Allied landings placed nearly 65,000 U.S. troops in North Africa, accompanied by hundreds of new tanks. German intelligence at first downplayed their significance, yet within weeks, field reports mentioned new American machines larger than before, numerous and identical. Bundesarchiv, 1942. Standardization became visible even to the enemy. Context deepened with geography. North Africa punished vehicles as much as men. Supply lines stretched over 1,000 miles from Tripoli to forward units. Heat destroyed tires, sand infiltrated gearboxes, and fuel evaporated under relentless sun. German machines, precise and often fragile, suffered breakdowns. The Sherman's design, though less elegant, proved resilient. Its air filters handled dust, and its tracks gripped soft ground better than the narrow wheels of Axis vehicles. Micro-hook. How could a tank considered average in Europe become extraordinary in Africa? By early 1943, Rommel confronted Shermans directly at Kasserine Pass. The clash revealed both American inexperience and American depth. Green U.S. crews mishandled tactics, and German gunners scored dozens of kills, but destroyed tanks were quickly replaced. More Shermans arrived by convoy every week. In February alone, 150 new vehicles reinforced the front. U.S. Army Logistics Report, 1943. Attrition favored the factories. Axis motif returns. Rommel's assumption that America lacked fighting power collided with the reality of replacement without pause. Losses that would cripple German battalions barely dented U.S. capacity. Rommel himself admitted as much in a message to Berlin. They are clumsy, but they are learning. Their equipment flows like water, and they repair quickly. Captured radio transcript, 1943. The shift in tone marked the beginning of recognition. The underestimated adversary was becoming dangerous. The Shermans were not invincible. German 88mm guns pierced their armor easily. Even Panzer IVs with long-barreled 75mm weapons could kill them at range. But each engagement showed the same pattern. Where Germans destroyed 10, 20 more appeared. A tank that was good enough, multiplied by thousands, outweighed technical superiority built in hundreds. By May 1943, Axis forces in North Africa were collapsing. More than 275,000 German and Italian troops surrendered, a blow greater in numbers than Stalingrad. U.S. War Department, 1943. The Sherman was not the sole cause, but it was central to momentum. For Rommel, recalled to Europe before the final defeat, the message was unmistakable. America could fight, and it fought with machines delivered by the tens of thousands. Axis motif closes the block. The arc from mockery to confrontation was underway. What began as dismissal of America's weakness was already transforming into dread of its strength. February 1943. The mountains of central Tunisia formed jagged silhouettes under the winter sun. Narrow passes channeled armies into kill zones. And here, Rommel prepared his blow. The U.S. II Corps, green and untested, faced his Afrika Corps at Kasserine Pass. Dust clouds rose as German panzers advanced, tracks biting into rocky soil. Rommel believed this would be a repeat of earlier victories over British forces. He expected chaos, retreat, and easy triumph. At first, his prediction seemed correct. American units broke under coordinated artillery and tank fire. Crews abandoned positions, and German armored spearheads sliced through lines. But as the fighting stretched, a new presence appeared. Columns of Sherman M4s arrived in numbers Rommel had not anticipated. Reports note at least 150 Shermans deployed in the first phase of Kasserine, U.S. Army Battle Report, 1943. The Sherman's 75mm gun was not superior to the German long-barreled 75mm or the feared 88. Yet, in the confined terrain of Tunisia, volume of fire counted. 10 Shermans firing simultaneously could overwhelm positions where 2 or 3 panzers stood. A U.S. officer later wrote, "Our gunnery was poor, but we had shells to spare and tanks to burn." U.S. National Archives, 1943. That imbalance shifted momentum. Axis motif returns. Rommel's assumption of American weakness collided with the arrival of massed armor. His shock was not at individual performance, but at scale. Sensory detail of Kasserine survives in letters. Soldiers described the roar of tank engines echoing through valleys, the metallic stench of burning steel, and the choking dust that blinded both sides. German crews recalled how Shermans seemed endless, always another behind the smoke. Bundesarchive, 1943. The psychological effect was as damaging as the physical. Losses were heavy. The U.S. II Corps suffered over 6,000 casualties at Kasserine, including hundreds of vehicles destroyed or captured. U.S. War Department, 1943. But replacements arrived within weeks. By March, new shipments landed in Algeria, replenishing losses almost overnight. Rommel's own panzer divisions, by contrast, struggled with shortages. Some battalions counted fewer than 30 operational tanks after weeks of fighting. Micro-hook. What happens when one side can replace defeat faster than the other, can celebrate victory? The next test came at El Guettar in late March 1943. General Patton, newly in command of the Second Corps, organized his Shermans with strict discipline. Nearly 200 tanks massed for counterattack. German forces, including elements of the 10th Panzer Division, advanced into American lines. At dawn, concealed Sherman units opened fire. For hours, the valley shook with cannon blasts. German diaries noted, "Every hill sprouted their machines. They rise from the ground like weeds." Bundesarchive, 1943. Rommel himself was no longer present. Illness had forced his return to Europe, but his legacy weighed heavily on the battle. His officers, trained in maneuver, found themselves outmatched by American artillery coordination, and sheer tank numbers. When German panzers fell back, American columns pursued aggressively. Though costly, the battle marked a psychological turn. U.S. forces had absorbed defeat, learned and returned stronger. Axis motif sharpens again. The underestimated adversary not only replaced losses, but adapted doctrine. Rommel's view that America could not fight was crumbling. At El Guitar, the Sherman's flaws showed clearly. German 81mm guns knocked out dozens in fields littered with burning holes. Crews described the terror of shells punching through armor, flames engulfing turrets, and the deafening crash of ammunition cooking off. Yet morale shifted, because survivors saw replacements roll forward even as wrecks smoldered. Industrial depth translated into psychological resilience. A British observer summarized, "The Americans are raw, but their machines never stop coming. The Germans grow weary. The Americans grow numerous." Imperial War Museum, 1943. That contrast set the tone for the remainder of the Tunisian campaign. By April, Axis supply lines were collapsing. Convoys across the Mediterranean faced constant air and naval attack. Each month, fewer than 10,000 tons reached North Africa, while Allied convoys delivered over 100,000. U.S. Navy Logistics Report, 1943. Fuel shortages crippled German mobility. Shermans advanced with secure depots and endless gasoline, while German panzers sat idle for lack of fuel. Microhook. Could even Rommel's skill survive against arithmetic so brutal? In May 1943, Axis resistance disintegrated. Over 275,000 prisoners marched into captivity. Among them were veterans who once laughed at America's war effort. Many admitted astonishment at how quickly U.S. forces had matured. A captured German officer remarked, "We thought them soft. Instead, they bury us in machines." U.S. National Archives, 1943. Axis motif closes this block. The phase of underestimation was finished. Rommel's legacy in Africa ended not with triumph, but with revelation. America could fight, and its Shermans proved it across Tunisia's valleys and hills. By the summer of 1943, the Sherman had shifted from newcomer to cornerstone. In Detroit, assembly lines clanged day and night. Ford, Chrysler, and American locomotive plants churned out holes at a rate unmatched in history. At the peak, nearly 2,500 Shermans left factories each month. War Production Board, 1944. For Rommel's successors, the question was no longer whether America could fight. The question was how to survive against an opponent who fought with factories. Each Sherman weighed about 30 tons, stood nearly 9 feet tall, and carried a 5-man crew. Its 75mm M3 gun could fire high explosive shells at infantry and armor-piercing rounds against tanks. Maximum armor reached 75mm at the front, sloped to deflect incoming fire. Speed on flat ground topped 25 miles per hour, with a range of 120 miles. In desert or mud, it often outlasted German machines designed for European roads. Axis motif returns. The underestimated nation had not only fielded an army, but mechanized it at planetary scale. The logistical system sustaining this was staggering. Between November 1942 and July 1943, U.S. convoys delivered more than 1.5 million tons of supplies to North Africa and the Mediterranean. U.S. Army Transport Command, 1944. Among the crates of food, fuel, and ammunition came 2,300 Shermans. Each convoy was an armored spear tip disguised as cargo. German U-boats tried to intercept, but numbers overwhelmed them. Even with losses at sea, replacements arrived faster than German analysts believed possible. The Germans attempted their own reinforcement. Yet by spring 1943, only a few dozen panzers reached Tunisia each month. Fuel shipments were halved under Allied air attack. Rommel had once maneuvered freely, striking like lightning. Now, his successors fought with empty fuel tanks and dwindling reserves. The Sherman, imperfect in design, triumphed through endurance. At Sicily in July 1943, Shermans stormed ashore in Operation Husky. More than 600 tanks landed in the opening phases. War Department Report, 1943. They clawed their way up mountain passes, engines groaning under strain, while German defenders fought from stone houses and vineyards. American columns advanced regardless. supporting infantry with fire and crushing roadblocks. A German officer recorded bitterly, "We kill many, but their columns keep climbing. It is a wall of steel." Bundesarchiv, 1943. Microhook. What fortress can hold when steel climbs walls faster than men can rebuild them? Flexibility magnified the Sherman's reach. Engineers turned the basic chassis into dozens of variants. Bulldozer Shermans cleared obstacles. Flamethrower models torched bunkers. Duplex drive amphibious Shermans swam ashore on Normandy beaches. Recovery vehicles pulled wrecks from mud. No German equivalent matched this adaptability at such scale. Where Germany crafted specialized tanks in hundreds, America produced universal platforms in tens of thousands. The ethical capsule appears here. Geneva Conventions never considered what happened when industrial multiplication replaced tactical brilliance. Was victory still defined by maneuver or by mathematics? In 1943, German commanders called it material war and complained of unfairness. Historians today frame it differently. Once mobilized, America demonstrated that war itself had become a contest of mass production, not duels of elite formations. The Sherman was the proof. Numbers cemented the reality. By the end of 1943, nearly 20,000 Shermans had been built. Germany produced fewer than 6,000 Panzer IVs in the same period. Even when the formidable Panther appeared, production lagged. 2,953 built in 1943-44. Against them, American factories produced nearly 10 times as many Shermans. Each destroyed tank was a minor setback, not a strategic blow. Axis motif reinforces. The once dismissed adversary was now defining the battlefield through quantity. Rommel's underestimation echoed as bitter irony. On the Italian peninsula, Shermans forced crossings of rivers and assaults on fortified hills. At Salerno, September 1943, they provided mobile firepower against German counterattacks. Soldiers described rain-soaked nights, mud clinging to treads, and the acrid stench of diesel mixed with wet uniforms. Yet the tanks kept moving. A private recalled, "We cursed them when they bogged, but blessed them when their guns silenced a machine nest." U.S. National Archives, 1944. The paradox was alive. Flawed individually, decisive collectively, German tactical skill remained lethal. Ambushes with 88mm guns destroyed entire platoons. At Anzio, Shermans burned by the dozens. Still, replacements arrived. By early 1944, over 7,000 Shermans operated across Mediterranean theaters. War Department Logistics Report, 1944. Germany could not match that tempo. Attrition no longer favored the defender. Microhook. What happens when even defeat carries within it the seed of tomorrow's reinforcement? By the time Rommel returned to Europe in 1943, preparing defenses for the Atlantic Wall, he knew the truth. In one memorandum he wrote, "The Americans measure war in units of steel. They replenish faster than we destroy. This is their advantage." Bundesarchiv, 1943. His recognition was late but accurate. Axis motif closes this block. The underestimated adversary had revealed its engine of war. Rommel's belief that America could not fight had dissolved in the roar of factories and the grind of Shermans rolling forward without end. May 1943. The dust of Tunisia settled over the largest surrender of German forces since the start of the war. More than 275,000 Axis soldiers laid down their arms. U.S. War Department, 1943. Entire divisions marched into captivity. Panzers, once symbols of unstoppable blitzkrieg, stood silent with empty fuel tanks. The Afrika Korps, Rommel's proud command, ceased to exist as a fighting force. The cause was not a single defeat, but relentless pressure from Allied manpower and machines. The Sherman was not perfect. German gunners mocked its thin armor, calling it a Ronson, after a lighter brand because it ignited easily. Yet its role was never singular. It was not one tank against one tank, but thousands against dozens. At Kasserine and El Ghoutar the pattern was clear. German skill inflicted losses, but American depth erased them. In war, replacement became as decisive as destruction. Axis motif returns. Rommel's assumption, America could not fight, collapsed in the face of surrender statistics. The underestimated adversary had proven capable of sustaining entire theaters of war. The fall of North Africa opened the gates to Europe. In July 1943, Shermans rolled ashore in Sicily. More than 600 landed in the opening phase of Operation Husky, War Department Report 1943. They climbed steep passes under artillery fire, engines roaring through narrow villages. German defenders, exhausted from Tunisia, watched fresh waves arrive with unbroken momentum. A captured officer later admitted, "We thought the desert ended them. Instead, they multiply." Bundesarchiv 1943. In Italy, Shermans spearheaded assaults through mountain valleys. At Monte Cassino in 1944, tanks clawed up muddy slopes where infantry stalled. Soldiers described the ground vibrating with each tread, the smell of damp earth and oil clinging to their boots, the flash of shells lighting ruined abbeys. The sensory imprint of steel became part of every campaign. Microhook. How do you stop an enemy who replaces not just tanks, but confidence? For Rommel, now overseeing defenses in France, the consequences were grim. He studied Allied landings in Italy and concluded that any invasion of northern France would bring even greater mass. In a report, he warned, "The Americans will land with factories, not divisions. Their tank is not exceptional, but their production is endless." Bundesarchiv, 1944. The echo of Africa haunted him. Ethical capsule fits here. In 1943, German officers argued that such industrial imbalance stripped combat of fairness. Geneva did not regulate quantity. Could a war be called a test of generalship when one side replaced every loss with 10 more? Historians today describe this as the rise of total war. Combat was no longer duel but attrition at industrial scale. The Sherman symbolized this transformation. In Normandy, June 1944, Rommel's fears came true. More than 1,500 Shermans landed in the first waves, U.S. War Department 1944. Within days, thousands filled the hedgerows. German defenders armed with Panzerfausts and 88s fought bitterly, but Allied columns pressed inland regardless. Reports described the ground as alive with tanks, every lane, every field. Bundesarchiv 1944. Africa's lesson repeated itself on French soil. Numbers dictated outcomes. The psychological weight was immense. Civilians in liberated villages recalled the endless drone of engines, the metallic smell of exhaust, the sight of olive-drab armor stretching to the horizon. To them, the Sherman was not just a tank. It was a signal that the Allies could not be stopped. By the end of 1944, more than 17,000 Shermans operated in Europe. Germany's own armored reserves dwindled to a fraction. Even the feared Tiger and Panther, superior in design, appeared in handfuls. A Tiger destroyed one Sherman with ease, but when facing 10, it rarely survived long. One German crewman wrote bitterly, "Each time we fire, 3 more arrive. It is fighting the ocean with stones." Bundesarchiv 1944. Axis motif closes this block. Rommel's doubt about America's fighting will had transformed into a grim lesson. The underestimated enemy now wielded industrial oceans of steel. Spring 1945. Columns of Shermans rolled through the heart of Germany. Town after town fell as olive-drab armor advanced along cobblestones. Civilians stared from shattered windows at the endless repetition of the same silhouette. A medium tank, neither elegant nor terrifying, yet multiplied until resistance felt meaningless. For Rommel, gone from the battlefield months earlier, the final irony had unfolded. The army he once mocked had carried its machines across continents and finished the Reich. The statistics told the same story. By the end of the war, over 49,000 Shermans had been produced. War Production Board 1946. Germany had built fewer than 1,400 Tigers and about 6,000 Panthers. The comparison was brutal. For every German heavy tank, America fielded entire brigades of Shermans. Replacement cycles turned defeat into delay rather than disaster. Axis motif returns one last time. The underestimated enemy had proven unstoppable, not through perfection, but through persistence. Shermans did not vanish with victory. Surplus tanks spread worldwide. In 1948, Israel used them in its War of Independence. forming the backbone of armored brigades. In Korea, Shermans fought across frozen hills, supporting UN infantry against North Korean and Chinese forces. In Indochina, French units deployed them in colonial campaigns. A tank born in Detroit became a tool of geopolitics for decades. Culturally, the Sherman became iconic. Films and newsreels showed them rolling through liberated Paris, flags waving from turrets. Veterans remembered the vibration of the engine, the clank of tracks, the greasy taste of air inside the turret after hours of firing. These details imprinted themselves in collective memory. To Allied soldiers, the Sherman was not glamorous, but it was always there. Microhook. How does reliability become legend? By being present in every story of victory. The ethical capsule finds closure. During the war, German officers called America's reliance on mass unfair. Geneva did not regulate production. Was a tank that burned easily, yet returned endlessly, a distortion of combat's balance? Historians today argue that the Sherman signaled a shift. Modern war rewarded systems, not duels. Quantity, logistics, and resilience proved as decisive as bravery. The debate lingers, but the verdict of history is clear. Rommel's reputation survived as that of a daring tactician. Yet his underestimation of America stands as one of his greatest miscalculations. His early mockery, "They are amateurs, not fighters," was buried under the weight of thousands of Shermans. He faced not just an army, but an economy in motion. The Sherman's global footprint outlasted the generation that built it. More than 20,000 remained in service worldwide into the 1950s. U.S. War Department Summary, 1946. Some nations modernized them with new guns and armor, keeping them active into the 1960s and beyond. Even today, rusting hulks stand as monuments in villages from Normandy to the Pacific. Veterans anthropomorphized the machine. They gave their Shermans names, painted slogans on turrets, and wrote about them as companions. Letters described tanks saving us like brothers, or enduring more than men could bear. Machines blurred into memory as comrades. Axis motif closes. The enemy, once dismissed as incapable, had won not through brilliance, but through endurance and the will of industry. The final lesson reaches beyond tanks. America's Shermans demonstrated that war in the modern age was not only about strategy, but about systems. Factories, convoys, fuel depots, and repair shops mattered as much as generals. The machine that Rommel underestimated proved that fighting power was no longer measured by tradition, but by production lines. Final figure anchors the thought. By 1945, Allied Shermans had driven an estimated 11 billion miles collectively across all theaters. U.S. War Department Final Logistics Report, 1946. That distance equals nearly 470,000 circuits of the Earth. A tank, once dismissed as ordinary, had circled the planet in action, rewriting history with tracks and steel.